The night Troy fell was unlike any other in history. Picture this: a city that had withstood a decade of siege, its towering walls unbroken, its people weary but defiant. Then, out of the silence, a monstrous wooden horse looms at the gates, a gift from the vanished Greek army. The Trojans, desperate for victory, drag it inside, unaware that within its hollow belly, the very doom they feared lies waiting. By dawn, the streets run red, the great city burns, and the legend of the Trojan horse is born. But what if everything you think you know about that horse is wrong? Over the next 50 myths, we'll unravel the secrets of this ancient deception, from divine interventions to hidden compartments, from Cassandra's cursed warnings to the horse's ghostly afterlife. Was it really just a trick or something far darker? The answers might surprise you. Stay with us, because the story you've heard is only the beginning. Now, let's step into the realm of the gods, where myth and history blur. The Greeks didn't just credit their cunning for the Trojan horse, they believed the gods themselves had a hand in its creation. According to Homer's Odyssey, it was Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, who inspired the design. She whispered the idea into Odysseus' ear, turning a desperate gamble into a divine stratagem. And she wasn't alone. Virgil's Aeneid suggests Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes, might have blessed the horse as a weapon to shake Troy's foundations literally. After all, to the ancients, no great victory could happen without the gods' favor. Imagine the Trojans celebrating what they thought was a peace offering, unaware that Athena's brilliance and Poseidon's wrath were sealed inside that wooden shell. This wasn't just a trick, it was destiny written by the gods themselves. But here's the twist: if the horse was truly divine, did the Trojans ever stand a chance? Or was their fate sealed the moment the Greeks prayed for help? The answer lies in the shadows of Olympus. But who was the craftsman behind this legendary deception? Shifting our focus from divine hands to mortal ones, we encounter Epeius, the often overlooked builder of the Trojan horse. Homer's Iliad describes him as a skilled but ordinary carpenter, a man who won no fame for his bravery in battle, yet whose craftsmanship sealed Troy's fate. But later historians, like the Roman writer Pausanias, spun a different tale, claiming Epeius received divine guidance from Athena herself, her whispers turning his chisel into an instrument of destiny. So which is true? Was Epeius just a talented mortal, or did the gods truly guide his hands? Archaeology offers a clue. Bronze Age engineering suggests the horse's construction would have required no supernatural help, just ingenuity. The Greeks of that era built siege engines and towering ships, so a hollow wooden horse was well within their skills. Yet the myth of divine intervention persists, perhaps because the idea of a mere mortal outsmarting an entire city felt too ordinary for such an epic tale. Here's where the stories collide. Homer's version keeps Epeius grounded, a reminder that even the grandest schemes rely on human skill. But later poets, eager to amplify the drama, wrapped his work in Athena's aura. It's a classic tug of war between history and myth, one that leaves us wondering, does it matter whether the horse was built by a man or a miracle? After all, Troy fell either way. And that's the real power of the legend. It doesn't need gods to be unforgettable, just a carpenter with a clever idea and the audacity to pull it off. Now let's tackle the towering tales surrounding the Trojan horse itself, its size, its materials, and the wild exaggerations that have grown around it over centuries. Some ancient sources claim the horse stood as tall as a temple, so massive it scraped the sky, while others whispered it was built from sacred wood blessed by the gods. But how much of this is poetic license, and how much might hold a grain of truth? Bronze Age archaeology paints a more practical picture. Engineers of that era were certainly capable of crafting large wooden structures, think siege towers or ships, but a horse the size of a temple? Unlikely. Transporting and maneuvering such a colossal object would have been nearly impossible with the technology of the time. More plausible is that the horse was large enough to hold a small strike force, perhaps the height of a two-story house, hollowed out with careful craftsmanship. Then there's the question of materials. Myths speak of enchanted timber or wood from Apollo's sacred groves, but the reality was probably far simpler. The Greeks would have used whatever sturdy, available lumber they had, oak or pine, perhaps relying on skill rather than magic to make it convincing. After all, the horse didn't need to be divine, it just needed to be believable. What's fascinating is how these exaggerations reveal something deeper. A giant, god-touched horse makes for a better story, transforming a clever trick into something mythical. But the truth might be even more impressive: ordinary materials, human ingenuity, and a gamble so audacious it changed history. Whether it was towering or modest, sacred or plain, one thing's certain: it worked. And that's the real marvel. But what about the inside of the Trojan horse? Legends love to embellish the mystery, spinning tales of hidden chambers, deadly traps, and even a second, smaller horse nestled within the first, like some ancient nesting doll of deception. Some myths suggest the Greeks built secret compartments to muffle the sounds of soldiers shifting inside, while others claim the horse boasted false floors or even mechanisms to lock the Trojans in once they wheeled it through their gates. These stories aren't just wild imagination, they reflect real anxieties about ancient espionage. The Greeks were masters of psychological warfare, and the idea of a hollow horse rigged with tricks plays into universal fears of betrayal from within. Think of it like a Bronze Age Trojan virus, something harmless looking that unleashes chaos once it's inside the system. Modern pop culture has run with these myths too. From movies like Troy to video games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the horse often gets upgraded with trapdoors, hidden weapons, or even magical safeguards. These adaptations stretch the myth further, but they tap into the same primal thrill, the terror of the unseen threat. Yet the simplest version might be the most chilling. No traps, no nested horses, just a dark, cramped space where Greek soldiers waited in silence, listening to the celebrations of their enemies, knowing the slaughter to come. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one that plays on trust, not theatrics. And that's the real genius behind the horse's design. It didn't need bells and whistles. It just needed to be empty enough to hide an army and convincing enough to be welcomed home. Speaking of deception, let's turn to the master manipulator himself, the Greek spy Sinon, whose silver tongue sealed Troy's fate. How much of his story was truth and how much was a carefully crafted lie? That's where things get even more intriguing. Now, let's pull back the curtain on one of history's most cunning con artists, Sinon, the Greek spy whose silver tongue turned the tide of the Trojan War. According to Virgil's Aeneid, Sinon was left behind by the Greeks as part of their ruse, a seemingly broken man with a tale so convincing it would make even the wariest Trojan drop their guard. He claimed the Greeks had abandoned him as a sacrifice to the gods, and that the massive wooden horse was an offering to Athena, meant to appease her wrath after their failed siege. But here's the twist: he insisted that if the Trojans destroyed the horse, they'd incur Athena's fury, but if they brought it inside their walls, victory would be theirs. Virgil paints Sinon as a master manipulator, weaving lies with tears and theatrical gestures, but earlier versions of the myth, like fragments from the Little Iliad, tell a simpler story. No grand speeches, no divine omens, just a lone survivor spinning a basic lie to sell the horse. So which version is closer to the truth? Historians suspect Virgil amped up the drama for his Roman audience, turning Sinon into a symbol of Greek deceit and Trojan gullibility. What's fascinating is how Sinon's story plays on universal human weaknesses: our tendency to trust the vulnerable and our fear of divine punishment. The Trojans saw a wounded man, not a weapon. And that's the real brilliance of the deception. It wasn't just about the horse, it was about the story wrapped around it. But here's a question that lingers: did Sinon even exist? Some scholars argue he was a later invention, a narrative tool to explain how the Trojans fell for such an obvious trap. After all, Homer's Iliad never mentions him. Whether real or fabricated, Sinon's legacy endures as the ultimate reminder. In war, sometimes the most dangerous weapon is a well-told lie. And speaking of stories that shape destinies, our next chapter takes us to Troy's most tragic prophet Cassandra, whose warnings about the horse were doomed to be ignored. Why did no one listen to her? The answer lies in a curse far more twisted than any Greek trick. Now, we step into one of the most heartbreaking moments of the Trojan saga, Cassandra's desperate warnings about the wooden horse, and the cruel twist of fate that made her voice fall on deaf ears. Gifted with the power of prophecy by Apollo, but cursed so that no one would ever believe her, Cassandra was trapped in a nightmare. As the Trojans celebrated what they thought was their victory, she alone saw the horror hidden inside that towering wooden beast. She screamed, she pleaded, she tore at her hair in despair, but her words were dismissed as madness. This wasn't just bad luck, it was the perfect storm of Greek tragedy. The Trojans' refusal to listen wasn't merely ignorance, it was hubris, that fatal arrogance the gods loved to punish. They'd survived 10 years of war, outlasted the greatest Greek heroes, and now, with the enemy seemingly gone, they let triumph cloud their judgment. Cassandra's curse made her the ultimate voice in the wilderness, a truth-teller condemned to watch her city burn because pride deafened those around her. But here's the chilling layer to her story. Cassandra's prophecies weren't vague riddles. She described exactly how Greeks would burst from the horse's belly, how blood would flood the streets. Yet every detail she offered only made her seem more unhinged to the Trojans. It's a brutal lesson in how easily certainty can blind us, how the louder the truth, the harder some will fight to deny it. And this wasn't just Cassandra's tragedy. It echoed across Greek myths, from Oedipus ignoring warnings about his fate to Agamemnon dismissing omens of his murder. Time and again, these stories ask the same question. When destiny whispers, why do we plug our ears? For Troy, the answer came too late, as the very horse they dragged through their gates became the instrument of their ruin. Which brings us to another twist of the myth. Some versions suggest the horse itself was more than just wood and soldiers. What if it carried a deeper, darker magic? That's where our journey heads next, into theories linking the horse to Poseidon, the god whose earthquakes could shake cities and whose sacred animal just happened to be a horse. Now let's dive into a theory that ties the Trojan horse to something far more ancient and powerful, the god Poseidon himself. Picture this. The Greeks didn't just build a wooden decoy, they crafted a symbol soaked in divine irony. Poseidon, the god of the sea, earthquakes, and yes, horses, had a complicated history with Troy. Some myths claim the city once offended him by refusing to pay for his help in building its walls. Others say he sided with the Greeks during the war, holding a grudge. So when that massive horse appeared at Troy's gates, it wasn't just a trick, it was a poetic revenge. Think about it, Poseidon's earthquakes were legendary for reducing cities to rubble in seconds. What if the horse was his metaphorical quake, a silent, looming force that cracked Troy's defenses from within, just as an earthquake shatters foundations? Even the material mattered: wood, which bends but doesn't break under pressure, mirroring how the Greeks outlasted Troy's walls through patience and cunning. And let's not forget the horse's most chilling detail, its hollow belly, a void waiting to unleash chaos, much like the gaping earth in a quake, but the connections run deeper. Poseidon's sacred animal was the horse, often depicted as a stallion rising from the waves. Some ancient artists even showed him creating the first horse by striking a rock. By using his sacred creature as the weapon, the Greeks might have been signaling divine approval, a final twist of the knife for the Trojans. Imagine their horror realizing too late that they'd dragged a god's wrath inside their walls. This theory also explains why later storytellers, like Virgil, hinted at supernatural elements around the horse. Whispers of its eyes gleaming like gemstones, or its joints creaking with unnatural life. take on new meaning if Poseidon's power was woven into its design. Was it just wood and nails or something more? The myths leave it tantalizingly unclear, blending human cunning with the eerie touch of the divine. And here's the kicker. If the horse was Poseidon's doing, then Troy's fall wasn't just a military defeat, it was destiny written by the gods. A reminder that in Greek myths, even the cleverest mortals are just pawns in a much larger game. But the horse's secrets don't end there. Next, we'll explore how the Trojans' own celebrations, their laughter, their toasts, their sheer relief might have been the final piece of the Greeks' trap. Because sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a horse, it's hubris. Now let's pull back the curtain on one of the most haunting scenes in the Trojan saga. The night the city's celebrations turned into its downfall. Picture the scene. After years of war, the Trojans wake to find the Greek camp empty, their enemies seemingly vanished, and only that towering wooden horse left behind. Relief floods the city. They drag the horse inside, convinced the war is over, and what follows is a night of wild feasting, drinking, and reckless joy. But according to some ancient accounts, this wasn't just spontaneous celebration. It might have been carefully orchestrated by Greek spies hiding among them. Take Sinon, the Greek infiltrator who supposedly stayed behind to sell the lie. Some myths suggest he didn't just convince the Trojans to take the horse inside. He also encouraged the festivities, maybe even slipping something into the wine to make the revelry louder and the guards slower. Imagine the scene: torches flickering, music swelling, drunk soldiers stumbling past the horse's shadow, completely unaware of the armed Greeks waiting inside. It's a moment ripe for betrayal, and artists through the ages have loved capturing it, the stark contrast between the Trojans' laughter and the silent killers in their midst. Look at ancient pottery or Renaissance paintings of this night, and you'll see recurring details: goblets tipped over, faces slack with drunkenness, even Greek helmets peeking from the horse's belly as the Trojans dance obliviously. One chilling theory suggests the Greeks didn't just hide in the horse, they also had allies already inside Troy, blending into the crowd, stoking the chaos. Maybe they spread rumors that the horse was a sacred offering to Athena, and disrespecting it would bring her wrath, so the Trojans, eager to prove their piety, partied harder, sealing their fate. But here's the twist: some versions claim the Trojans weren't entirely fooled. A few guards stayed sober, suspicious, yet their warnings were drowned out by the noise, or maybe by the crowd's sheer exhaustion from years of war. That's the tragic irony. The moment Troy finally let its guard down was the moment the Greeks struck, and when the torches burned low and the last drunk revelers passed out, the horse's hatch creaked open and the real nightmare began. This myth isn't just about deception, it's about human nature. The Trojans didn't lose because they were stupid. They lost because they were desperate to believe the war was over, desperate enough to ignore every instinct. And that's a lesson that echoes far beyond ancient Troy. But the horse's story isn't done yet. Next, we'll uncover the role of the most infamous woman in Greek myth, Helen. Was she a helpless pawn, or did she play an active part in the horse's deadly plot? The answer might surprise you. Now let's turn our attention to the woman at the heart of this war, Helen herself. Was she merely a prize fought over by men, or did she play a more cunning role in the fall of Troy? The myths give us tantalizing hints that Helen might have been far more involved in the Trojan horse plot than she's often given credit for. One of the most intriguing stories claims that as the Trojans debated whether to bring the horse inside their walls, Helen circled it, calling out the names of Greek warriors in the voices of their wives. Imagine the eerie echo of familiar voices drifting from the horse's belly, voices that shouldn't be there. Some versions say she did this to test if Greeks were hiding inside, while others suggest she was helping them by luring the Trojans closer. Either way, it paints Helen not as a passive figure, but as someone weaving deception with her own hands. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Ancient poets like Virgil and Stesichorus hint that Helen's actions might have been guided by the gods. Aphrodite, who famously promised Helen to Paris, could have compelled her to aid the Greeks, twisting her loyalty like a puppet on strings. Or perhaps Helen, weary of her life in Troy, saw the horse as her ticket home. The myths leave it ambiguous. Was she a traitor, a pawn, or both? What's clear is that Helen's role in the horse's story adds layers to her character. She's not just the face that launched 1,000 ships. She's a woman navigating impossible choices, caught between divine will and her own survival. And that makes her one of the most complex figures in this entire saga. But the horse's secrets don't end there. Next, we'll delve into one of the darkest corners of this myth, the chilling stories of what happened to Troy's children that fateful night. The answers are even more unsettling than you might think. Now we come to one of the most unsettling chapters of the Trojan horse story, what happened to the children of Troy that night. While we often picture the horse as a clever trick, some ancient sources reveal a far darker side to this legend, where innocence became a weapon in the Greeks' hands. One chilling myth claims that Greek soldiers used Trojan children to test whether the horse was safe. Imagine the horror: small hands pressed against the wooden beams, little voices calling out as they were urged to climb inside first. If the horse was a trap, the children would pay the price. Other versions suggest the Greeks took young hostages, threatening harm unless the Trojans accepted their gift. These stories force us to ask, how far were the Greeks willing to go for victory? Ancient writers were deeply conflicted about these tales. Some, like the poet Quintus Smyrnius, framed the children's role as tragic but necessary, a grim sacrifice for the greater strategy. Others, like later historians, condemned it outright, arguing that even in war, certain lines shouldn't be crossed. The debate echoes into modern times. Was this ruthless pragmatism or pure cruelty disguised as tactics? What makes these myths especially haunting is how they clash with the heroic image of the Greeks. We think of Odysseus as the brilliant strategist, but here his cunning edges into something far more sinister. And for the Trojans, the horse wasn't just a threat to their city, it was a betrayal of their most vulnerable. Yet even in these dark tales, there's a twist. Some accounts claim the children survived, hidden by sympathetic Greeks or spared at the last moment. It's a reminder that myths rarely give us easy answers, only shadows of choices made in desperation. But the horse's mysteries don't end with human suffering. Next, we'll explore a moment that defies logic, when the wooden beast itself seemed to come alive. The truth behind its legendary whinny is stranger than fiction. Now let's turn to a moment that blurs the line between myth and magic, the legendary whinny of the Trojan horse. Picture this as the Trojans debate whether to bring the massive wooden structure inside their walls. The horse suddenly lets out a thunderous neigh, as if alive. Some ancient sources claim this eerie sound startled the guards, creating just enough distraction for Greek spies to slip through the gates. Others say it was a prearranged signal, a cue for the warriors hidden inside to prepare for their midnight attack. But how could a lifeless statue produce such a sound? Here's where the myths split. One version suggests the Greeks hid a man inside the horse's head, a ventriloquist of sorts, mimicking the cry of a real stallion. Another, more supernatural take insists the gods themselves breathed life into the wood, a divine omen meant to unsettle the Trojans. Poseidon, god of horses, was often tied to this legend, his influence seen as a warning Troy ignored at its peril. Animal symbolism runs deep here. In ancient Greece, horses were sacred to Poseidon and symbols of both power and deception. A horse's neigh could be interpreted as a prophecy, joyful to some, ominous to others. The Trojans, already divided over the horse's meaning, might have taken the sound as a sign of favor from the gods, sealing their fatal mistake. Yet the most fascinating twist. Later historians argue the whinny was pure psychological warfare. The Greeks didn't need magic, they needed the Trojans to believe in the horse's power. A well-timed noise amplified by the hollow wooden body could have been enough to play on their fears. This small detail opens a bigger question. How much of the horse's legend was crafted from whispers, echoes, and the human love for a story that sends chills down the spine? Next, we'll unravel even stranger theories like the claim the horse was never a horse at all, but something entirely different. Now let's step into a world of what-ifs, where the Trojan horse might not have been a horse at all. Hidden in the shadows of history are whispers of alternative designs, blueprints that never made it into the legend we know today. Imagine if the Greeks had chosen a different disguise. Some ancient fragments suggest they considered building a massive ship, a nod to their naval prowess, or even a towering bull, a sacred symbol in many Mediterranean cultures. Others claim the original plan was a giant armored soldier, a literal Trojan man instead of a horse. So why did the horse win out? The answer lies in a mix of symbolism and sheer psychological cunning. Horses were deeply tied to Troy's identity. Their famed mounted warriors were a source of pride. By using a horse, the Greeks played on Trojan vanity, making the gift feel like a tribute rather than a threat. Plus, horses were sacred to Poseidon, the god who'd already sided with the Greeks. The design wasn't just practical, it was a layered insult, a divine joke at Troy's expense. But there's another layer. A ship might have been too obvious the Greeks were sailors after all. A bull could have felt random, lacking the military undertones. The horse, though, it was personal. Troy's walls were said to be built by Poseidon, the horse god himself. By offering a wooden horse, the Greeks were essentially returning a corrupted version of Troy's own divine protection. The horse also had staying power as a storytelling device. Its hollow belly was the perfect metaphor for hidden danger, a visual that stuck in cultural memory. A ship or a soldier wouldn't have carried the same eerie duality, something beautiful on the outside, deadly within. That's why, even when other versions of the myth floated around, the horse galloped ahead and claimed its place in history. Next, we'll tackle another puzzle: how the Greeks supposedly fit an entire army inside a single wooden structure. The answer might surprise you. Now let's tackle one of the most practical mysteries of the Trojan horse. How on earth did the Greeks fit an entire army inside it? The epics name dozens of warriors from Odysseus to Menelaus crammed into that wooden beast. But let's be honest, unless it was the size of a palace, the math doesn't add up. So what's really going on here? One theory suggests the horse wasn't the only way in. Hidden tunnels, dug secretly by Greek allies inside Troy, might have allowed more soldiers to slip in under cover of darkness. Ancient spies were masters of deception, and a few well-placed traitors could have opened gates or created passages while the Trojans were distracted by their gift. Then there's the numbers game. Ancient storytellers loved exaggeration. Heroic tales weren't meant to be fact-checked, but to all listeners. Maybe the horse held only a handful of key players, while the rest of the army waited offshore, signaled to attack once the trap was sprung. Homer's epic scale might have been more about drama than logistics. But here's the twist: some historians argue the horse was never meant to hold soldiers at all. Instead, it could have been a ceremonial offering hiding something far smaller, a single spy, or even a mechanism to unlock the city gates from within. The idea of warriors pouring out might have been a later flourish, turning a clever trick into a grand legend. So was the horse a crowded death trap or a symbolic key? The truth might be somewhere in between, a blend of cunning, myth-making, and the fog of war. Next, we'll explore what happened to the horse after Troy fell, and why its fate is just as mysterious as its origins. Now let's turn to one of the most puzzling questions about the Trojan horse: what actually happened to it after the fall of Troy? Myths and legends offer dramatic endings, from flames engulfing the wooden beast to waves swallowing it whole, but history tells a far murkier tale. Some stories claim the Trojans, realizing their fatal mistake, set the horse ablaze in a final act of defiance. Others say the Greeks themselves destroyed it, either to erase the evidence of their deception or to prevent it from becoming a cursed relic. There's even a wild tale that Poseidon, angered by the misuse of his sacred animal symbol, sent a tidal wave to drag the horse into the sea. But here's the catch: none of these dramatic endings appear in the earliest accounts. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey never mention the horse's fate, and later historians like Thucydides treat its disappearance as an open question. If the horse was as massive as legends claim, wouldn't its destruction or survival have been noteworthy? Archaeology doesn't help much either. No physical traces of the horse have ever been found, not even in the layers of Troy linked to the Bronze Age war. This silence suggests two possibilities. Either the horse was dismantled quietly, its wood repurposed or scattered, or it never existed in the form we imagine. So why do the myths insist on such fiery or watery ends? Symbolism. Burning the horse could represent Troy's total annihilation, while drowning it might mirror the Greeks' own perilous voyages home. But the likeliest truth, the horse simply vanished into legend, its fate as uncertain as the war that birthed it. Next, we'll see how Rome twisted this mystery to serve its own epic ambitions. Now let's shift our gaze from the ashes of Troy to the rising power of Rome, where the Trojan horse took on an entirely new life. The Romans, ever the masters of myth-making, didn't just inherit the story, they rewrote it to serve their empire. Enter Virgil's Aeneid, Rome's blockbuster epic that turned the horse from a Greek trick into a divine omen for Roman destiny. In Virgil's version, the horse isn't just a weapon, it's a symbol of fate. Aeneas, the Trojan hero and legendary ancestor of Rome, escapes the carnage with his father and son, carrying the weight of Troy's legacy. The Aeneid paints the horse as a necessary tragedy, the spark that sent Aeneas westward to found a new kingdom. By reframing the horse as part of a grander plan, Rome flipped the narrative. Troy's fall wasn't an end, but the birth of something greater. But the propaganda didn't stop there. Emperor Augustus, Virgil's patron, saw the horse's storytelling power and ran with it. He draped Rome in Trojan imagery, linking his reign to Aeneas' heroic lineage. Coins minted under Augustus featured the horse, subtly reminding citizens that their empire was built on destiny, not deception. Even Rome's military triumphs borrowed the horse's aura. Sieges were framed as righteous payback for Troy, with enemies cast as the Greeks who'd once burned a sacred city. The brilliance of Rome's spin, it made the horse a symbol of resilience, not ruin. Where Greeks saw cunning, Romans saw providence, and that's the real magic of myths, their clay reshaped by whoever holds them. Next, we'll see how medieval minds twisted the horse into something even stranger, an allegory for sin, salvation, and siege engines. As the centuries rolled on, the Trojan horse took on a whole new life in the medieval imagination, one that would have baffled the ancient Greeks and Romans alike. Picture this: monks hunched over dusty manuscripts, quills scratching as they transformed the horse into something far stranger than a simple war trick. In the Middle Ages, the horse became less about history and more about moral lessons. Some scholars saw it as a metaphor for the devil's deception, a wooden trap luring sinners to their doom. One popular Christian allegory even compared the horse to the biblical Trojan gift of the golden calf, a false idol that led people astray. The message was clear: beware of temptations disguised as blessings. But not all medieval takes were so solemn. In military circles, the horse got a practical makeover. Some chroniclers insisted it wasn't a horse at all, but a massive siege engine, a medieval battering ram or tower dressed up in poetic language. After all, why would anyone build a giant wooden animal when a war machine made more sense? This theory says more about medieval warfare than ancient myths, revealing how each era projects its own logic onto the past. Then there's the truly bizarre twist, the horse as a symbol of the church itself. A few theologians argued that just as the Greeks hid inside the horse to enter Troy, Christ's followers carried divine truth hidden within the church's structure. It's a stretch, but it shows how myths morph to fit the fears and faiths of the times. From devilish trick to divine vessel, the medieval horse proves one thing: stories never stay still. Next, we'll see how Renaissance artists took these wild ideas and turned them into something even more spectacular. Now, let's step into the vibrant world of the Renaissance, where artists didn't just retell the Trojan horse myth, they reinvented it with breathtaking creativity. Picture the scene: canvases bursting with color, the horse no longer just a weapon of war but a symbol of human ingenuity and drama. Take Giovanni Battista Tiepolo, the master of grand storytelling. In his frescoes, the horse isn't just dragged into Troy. It's a towering spectacle bathed in golden light, with Trojans gaping in awe or suspicion. Tiepolo's version amps up the tension, showing the moment before disaster strikes, as if the horse itself is breathing deception into the air. But here's where things get even more interesting. Some Renaissance artists took wild liberties with the horse's design. Ever seen one with wheels? A few painters, like the lesser-known Venetian artist Jacopo Tintoretto, sketched the horse rolling into Troy on wooden wheels as if it were a colossal siege cart. It's a quirky twist, blending medieval war machine ideas with Renaissance flair. Then there's the question of scale. While Homer's original text leaves the horse's size vague, Renaissance painters went big literally. Many depicted it dwarfing Troy's gates, so massive it defied logic. Was this artistic exaggeration or a nod to the myth's symbolic power? Either way, it made for jaw-dropping visuals. And let's not forget the Trojans themselves. Renaissance art loved drama, so scenes of drunken revelry around the horse became a favorite. Painters like Giulio Romano showed Trojans partying beneath its shadow, oblivious to the Greeks lurking inside, a stark reminder of hubris before the fall. From wheels to towering proportions, the Renaissance didn't just paint the horse, it brought it to life in ways Homer could never have imagined. Up next, we'll uncover how Napoleon saw the Trojan horse not as art, but as a blueprint for war. Now, let's fast forward from the Renaissance to the battlefields of the early 19th century, where Napoleon Bonaparte saw the Trojan horse not as a myth, but as a masterclass in military deception. Napoleon was obsessed with history's greatest strategists, and Odysseus' trick at Troy fascinated him. He reportedly kept a copy of the Iliad in his field tent, scribbling notes in the margins about the horse's psychological brilliance. To Napoleon, it wasn't just a wooden relic, it was proof that victory could be won with cunning as much as force. But did he actually use the horse as inspiration? Some historians point to his 1798 invasion of Egypt, where he disguised his army's strength by spreading false rumors and using decoy camps, a move straight out of Odysseus' playbook. Others argue his 1805 Ulm campaign, where he trapped an Austrian army by feigning retreat, echoed the Greeks' patience inside the horse. Napoleon himself never directly compared his tactics to the Trojan ruse, but his enemies certainly did. British cartoons of the era often depicted him as a sly Odysseus, or even as the horse itself, sneaking into Europe's gates. What's undeniable is how Napoleon weaponized myth. He understood that the horse's power wasn't just in its design, but in the story it told, a story of trust exploited and defenses undone. Whether he consciously mimicked it or not, the legend of Troy shaped his belief that war was as much about theater as it was about bullets. Up next, we'll delve into even stranger territory theories linking the Trojan horse to secret societies and their cryptic symbols. Was it more than just a war machine? Stay tuned. Now, let's step into the shadowy world of secret societies, where the Trojan horse takes on a whole new layer of mystery. Among the most intriguing and often misunderstood theories is the idea that Freemasons and other clandestine groups adopted the horse as a symbol of hidden knowledge or power. Some fringe historians claim the horse's hollow interior represents the Masonic concept of initiation, where secrets are revealed only to those deemed worthy. Others go further, suggesting the horse's design mirrors ancient esoteric symbols, like the Ark of the Covenant or even the geometric patterns found in Masonic lodges. But how much of this holds up? When we trace these claims back, they often stem from 19th century occult writers who loved blending mythology with conspiracy. For instance, a French author in the 1800s argued that the horse was a coded reference to the great work of alchemy, transforming deception into victory. Yet, actual Masonic texts from the era rarely mention the horse at all. In fact, Freemasonry's core symbolism leans more toward tools like the compass and square, not mythical war machines. That said, the horse's allure as a metaphor is undeniable. Just as the Greeks hid inside it, secret societies thrive on layers of meaning. But here's the key distinction. While the Masons valued allegory, there's no evidence they ever worshipped the horse as a literal icon. The connection seems to be more about modern myth-making than ancient tradition. So, was the Trojan horse a Masonic blueprint? Probably not. But its legend's adaptability shows just how deeply it's woven into humanity's love for hidden stories. Up next, we'll shift gears again, this time into the realm of psychology, where Freud and Jung saw the horse as something far more personal, a mirror of the human mind. Now, let's venture into the depths of the human mind, where the Trojan horse becomes more than just a war tactic. It transforms into a powerful symbol of our hidden fears and desires. Psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung saw the horse not as a mere wooden structure, but as a reflection of the unconscious packed with layers of meaning. Freud might have interpreted the horse as a metaphor for repressed impulses. Think about it, the Greeks hidden inside, waiting to burst forth, could symbolize suppressed emotions or desires suddenly breaking free. The Trojans, unaware of the danger within, might represent the conscious mind, oblivious to the turmoil lurking beneath the surface. Freud's theories often revolved around the idea that what we ignore or suppress eventually resurfaces, often destructively, just like Troy's downfall. Jung, on the other hand, might have viewed the horse through the lens of collective trauma or archetypes. For him, the horse could embody the shadow, the hidden, darker aspects of a society or individual. The Trojans' acceptance of the gift, despite warnings, might mirror humanity's tendency to embrace comforting illusions, even when they mask danger. Jung believed that myths like this one reveal universal patterns in human behavior, and the horse's deception could symbolize the recurring theme of betrayal in our shared stories. But here's the twist. Some modern psychologists argue that the horse also represents the duality of human nature. It's both a gift and a weapon, a symbol of trust and treachery. This duality resonates with how we often grapple with conflicting emotions or societal roles. The horse's hollow interior might even mirror the emptiness we sometimes feel when faced with deceit, whether in relationships or history. So, was the Trojan horse a psychological blueprint? In many ways, yes. Whether as a symbol of repressed desires, collective fears, or the shadow self, its legend continues to reveal as much about us as it does about ancient warfare. Next, we'll see how this very same symbol inspired real-world strategies in modern warfare, proving that myths never truly fade, they just adapt. Now, let's fast forward from ancient myth to modern battlefields, where the Trojan horse's legacy didn't just survive, it became a playbook for military deception. 20th century generals steeped in classical history saw the horse not as a dusty legend but as a masterclass in strategy. And nowhere was this more evident than in World War II's audacious Operation Mincemeat, a ruse so clever it could have been dreamed up by Odysseus himself. Here's how it worked. In 1943, British intelligence needed to mislead Nazi forces about the Allies' invasion plans for southern Europe. Their solution, a dead body dressed as a Royal Marine officer, carrying fake documents suggesting the attack would target Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily, the real objective. They floated the body off the Spanish coast, knowing German spies would find it. Just like the Trojans with their wooden gift, the Nazis swallowed the bait, diverting troops to the wrong locations. The result, a smoother Allied invasion of Sicily with fewer lives lost. Winston Churchill later called it the man who never was, a ghostly echo of the Greeks hidden inside the horse. But mincemeat wasn't alone. Military planners have long borrowed the horse's core principle, the art of making your enemy welcome their own destruction. During the Cold War, Soviet spies planted false evidence to mislead adversaries, while in the Gulf War, coalition forces used inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic to convince Saddam Hussein's army they'd attack from the sea, not the desert. Each time, the same psychological lever was pulled, exploiting trust, expectation, and human nature's tendency to see what it wants to see. What's fascinating is how these operations reveal the horse's timeless power. Whether it's hollow wood or forged papers, the mechanics change, but the psychology stays the same. As one British officer quipped, "The best lies are wrapped in truth," a line that could have been spoken by Sinon himself. And that's the real lesson here. From Troy to Normandy, the greatest weapon isn't always force. Sometimes it's the story your enemy believes. Next, we'll uncover how the horse's myth took an even stranger turn. Not on battlefields, but in the hands of archaeologists with nationalist agendas, where discovering the horse became its own kind of deception. But the story of the Trojan horse doesn't end on ancient battlefields or in modern war rooms. It takes an even stranger detour into the world of archaeology, where ambition and nationalism turn the search for the horse into its own kind of deception. In the 19th century, as Europe became obsessed with proving the historical truth behind ancient myths, a wave of so-called discoveries emerged, artifacts that supposedly confirmed Homer's tales, including remnants of the Trojan horse itself. One of the most notorious examples came from Heinrich Schliemann, the self-made archaeologist who claimed to have found Troy. While Schliemann's excavations at Hisarlik did uncover a Bronze Age city, his methods were questionable at best. He famously staged photos of his wife wearing Priam's treasure, a collection of gold jewelry he insisted belonged to Troy's royal family. But when it came to the horse, Schliemann went even further. He reportedly found wooden beams he declared were from the legendary structure, only for later experts to dismiss them as ordinary building materials from a much later period. Schliemann wasn't alone. Across Europe, forgers capitalized on the hunger for proof of Homer's epic. In Greece, a carpenter named Konstantinos Pacholis claimed to have uncovered a fragment of the horse's hull, complete with ancient Greek inscriptions. The artifact was displayed with great fanfare, until linguists pointed out the text contained grammatical errors impossible for the Bronze Age. The hoax was thinly veiled propaganda, meant to bolster Greece's national identity during its struggle for independence from the Ottoman Empire. Even more audacious was the case of a British collector who, in 1889, presented a set of Trojan horse nails to the Royal Archaeological Society. These iron spikes, he argued, were used to construct the horse's frame. The problem: iron was nearly non-existent in the Greek world during the Trojan War. The nails were likely medieval, but the allure of touching a piece of the myth was too strong for skeptics to resist. What's revealing about these hoaxes isn't just the forgery, it's the desperation to make the legend real. Nations and individuals alike wanted the horse to be more than a story. It became a symbol of cultural pride, a way to claim ownership over history itself. And just like the Trojans who dragged the horse inside their walls, many were all too eager to believe. Next, we'll tackle one of the most puzzling gaps in the tale: why Homer, the poet who immortalized the Trojan War, barely mentioned the horse at all. Was it an oversight or something more intentional? Now, let's turn to one of the most baffling mysteries of the Trojan horse story: the silence of Homer himself. The poet who gave us the Iliad and the Odyssey, the man who immortalized the Trojan War in epic detail, barely mentions the horse at all. In the Odyssey, it's referenced only in passing as a footnote in Odysseus' retelling of the war. And in the Iliad, the horse doesn't appear at all. So why would Homer, the master storyteller, leave out the most iconic trick of the war? One theory points to the nature of oral tradition. Homer's epics were sung or recited long before they were written down, and each performance might have included or excluded details based on the audience or the bard's preference. The horse could have been a later addition to the myth, something that grew in importance after Homer's time. Think of it like a game of telephone. Over centuries, the story evolved and the horse became central, even if it wasn't in the earliest versions. Another idea is that Homer's silence was deliberate. The Iliad is a poem about honor, glory, and the futility of war, not deception. The horse, a symbol of cunning over bravery, might have clashed with the themes he wanted to emphasize. Or perhaps Homer knew that leaving the horse shrouded in mystery made it even more powerful. By not over-explaining it, he let the legend grow in the minds of listeners, turning it into something almost supernatural. There's also the possibility that the horse was originally a separate story, a folk tale or local legend that later got woven into the Trojan War saga. Homer's epics were part of a much larger tapestry of myths, and not every thread made it into his poems. The horse might have been one of those threads, waiting for later poets like Virgil to give it the spotlight. Whatever the reason, Homer's silence adds another layer to the myth. It's as if the horse was too big, too strange, or too unsettling to fit neatly into his epic vision. And that, in itself, makes the legend even more fascinating. Next, we'll dig into another heated debate: where exactly was Troy? The search for its real location has sparked rivalries, wild theories, and even more archaeological drama. But shifting our focus from the mystery of Homer's silence, let's step into another heated debate: where exactly was Troy? The search for its real location has been a battleground of theories, rivalries, and even archaeological blunders. And here's the twist: the Trojan horse myths might hold clues to solving this ancient puzzle. For centuries, scholars argued whether Troy was even a real place or just a legend. Then came Heinrich Schliemann, a wealthy amateur archaeologist with a childhood obsession with Homer's epics. In the 1870s, he claimed to have found Troy at a site in modern-day Turkey called Hisarlik. But here's the catch: Schliemann was so eager to prove Homer right that he bulldozed through layers of history, potentially destroying the very evidence he sought. He even famously declared he'd gazed upon the face of Agamemnon, after uncovering gold artifacts only for later tests to reveal they were from a much earlier era. Oops, so did Schliemann get it wrong? Some experts say yes. Hisarlik does show signs of violent destruction around the time the Trojan War might have happened, but there's no definitive proof linking it to Homer's Troy. Other sites, like nearby Seshmi or even locations in Croatia, have been proposed as alternatives. The horse myths complicate things further. Some versions describe the horse being dragged uphill or near the sea, details that don't neatly match Hisarlik's geography. Then there's the question of scale. Homer's Troy was a mighty city, but Hisarlik's ruins suggest a modest settlement. Could the legends have exaggerated its size, or was the real Troy elsewhere? Even the horse's dimensions play into this. If it was tall as a temple, as some myths claim, would a smaller citadel like Hisarlik have had space for it? The debate rages on, but one thing's clear: the search for Troy is as much about myth as it is about dirt and stones. Every shovel strike seems to unearth new questions. And speaking of questions, our next stop is another curious twist. What was the horse really called? Ancient texts hint at names far stranger than just Trojan horse. Now let's tackle a question that might seem simple but opens up a world of linguistic intrigue. What was the Trojan horse actually called? You'd think something so legendary would have a straightforward name, but ancient texts reveal it wasn't always just the Trojan horse. Homer himself refers to it as the Dauratios hippos in the Odyssey, a Greek phrase meaning wooden horse, but here's where it gets interesting. The word hippos doesn't just mean horse. In some context, it could imply anything horse-shaped, even a ship's prow or a siege engine. Could the horse have been a metaphor for something else entirely? Some scholars argue that hippos might have been code for a battering ram or even a ship disguised as an offering, blending myth with military ingenuity. Then there's the Latin twist. When Virgil wrote the Aeneid, he called it the Equus Trojanus, a name that stuck in Western tradition. But earlier Greek poets like Stesichorus used even stranger terms, calling it the Dauratios Dolos, or wooden trick. That reframes the horse not just as an object, but as a symbol of deception itself. Digging deeper into language, the roots of these names reveal cultural biases. The Greeks emphasized the horse's material wood to highlight its humble, mortal construction, while later Roman writers focused on its Trojan identity, turning it into a cautionary tale about their rivals' gullibility. Even the word Trojan became shorthand for hidden danger thanks to Virgil's spin. So why did horse win out in popular memory? Likely because the image of a towering wooden animal captures the imagination better than a vague trick or machine. But next time you hear Trojan horse, remember, its name was never just a label. It was a weapon of words shaped by centuries of storytelling. And speaking of storytelling, our next stop dives into another myth that challenges expectations. What if the horse wasn't just full of Greek soldiers, but legendary female warriors? Now let's turn to a myth that flips the script on ancient warfare's gender roles. What if the Trojan horse wasn't just packed with Greek soldiers, but legendary female warriors? While most accounts focus on Odysseus and his men, some lesser-known stories suggest Amazons or even the huntress Atalanta might have been hidden inside, turning the horse into a symbol of defiance. The Amazons, fierce warriors often linked to Troy's allies, appear in fragments of lost epics. One version claims Queen Penthesilea's sisters joined the horse's crew, seeking vengeance for her death at Achilles' hands. It's a tantalizing idea, women exploiting Troy's trust to infiltrate the city, subverting the era's male-dominated battle narratives. Then there's Atalanta, the mythic heroine who outran and outfought men. Some poets imagined her disguised among the Greeks, her presence a silent rebuke to the Trojans' assumptions about who could wage war. But why would these stories emerge? Ancient Greece had rigid views on women in combat, yet myths like these crack open a door to alternate possibilities. The Amazons, though often portrayed as outsiders, symbolized uncontainable female power. By placing them inside the horse, storytellers might have been grappling with fears or secret admiration for women who broke the rules. Even the horse's hollow interior takes on new meaning here, a hidden space where gender norms could be temporarily upended. Skeptics, of course, point out that Homer never mentions female warriors in the horse, but that silence itself is telling. The Iliad and Odyssey were performed for audiences who expected certain tropes. Later poets, freer to experiment, might have woven these subversive threads into the myth. Whether true or not, the idea of women inside the horse challenges us to rethink who gets remembered in war stories and why. And speaking of unexpected twists, our next myth takes us from gender to geometry. How could a wooden structure supposedly fit all those Greek warriors? The answer, or lack thereof, reveals just how elastic this legend really is. Now let's peer into one of the Trojan horse's most eerie features, its eyes. Some legends claim this wooden beast wasn't just a hollow shell, but a living, watching entity. Ancient texts whisper of gemstone eyes embedded in the horse's head, glowing faintly in the twilight as if alive. Others describe intricate mechanisms hidden behind those eyes, turning the horse into a kind of ancient surveillance device, silently tracking the Trojans' every move. This idea taps into a deeper fascination with automatons in Greek mythology. Think of Tolos, the bronze giant who patrolled Crete, or Hephaestus's mechanical servants. The horse in these versions becomes more than a trick. It's a marvel of divine engineering. Some myths even suggest the eyes could pivot or blink, unnerving the Trojans who passed beneath them. Imagine the psychological warfare at play, a gift that seems to stare back at you as if judging your trust. But why eyes? In ancient symbolism, eyes were gateways to the soul or tools of the gods. Poseidon, often linked to the horse, was also a god of omens. The horse's gaze might have been seen as a divine warning, one the Trojans tragically ignored. Later storytellers amplified this, suggesting priests hid inside the horse's head, peering through the gemstones to guide the Greeks' attack. It's a chilling twist, blending technology and superstition. Skeptics argue these details were added centuries later as Greeks romanticized their past. Yet the persistence of the watching horse myth reveals something profound. Even in victory, the Greeks may have feared the guilt of their deception. Those unblinking eyes, whether real or imagined, became a metaphor for history itself, always watching, never forgetting. And just as the horse's gaze lingers in legend, our next myth plunges us into the darkness of its hollow belly. What secrets lurked in the silence between those wooden walls? The answer is stranger than you might think. Now let's untangle one of the most debated questions surrounding the Trojan horse who truly masterminded the plan. Was it Odysseus alone, the cunning hero of the Odyssey, or did he have help from a council of Greek leaders? The myths themselves can't seem to agree. Homer's Iliad barely mentions the horse, leaving room for later poets and historians to fill in the gaps. Some versions paint Odysseus as the sole architect, a brilliant tactician who dreamed up the scheme in isolation. These stories lean into his reputation as the man of twists and turns, the ultimate trickster who outsmarted Troy with a single, devastating idea. But other accounts, like those in Virgil's Aeneid, suggest the horse was a collaborative effort. A council of Greeks, Agamemnon, Menelaus, even the wise Nestor might have refined the plan together, turning Odysseus's spark into a full-blown strategy. What's fascinating is how Odysseus himself reflects on the horse in his later years. In the Odyssey, during his long journey home, there are moments where he seems haunted by the deception. Was it guilt, pride, or simply the weight of knowing his trick doomed not just Troy but countless lives, including his own men? One poignant line hints at his turmoil: "Even a fool learns after the storm." Some scholars read this as Odysseus admitting the horse's consequences were far darker than he'd imagined. The conflicting myths might reveal a deeper truth: the Greeks themselves were torn over the horse's legacy. Was it a stroke of genius or a moral compromise? By crediting Odysseus alone, they could celebrate individual brilliance, but by spreading the responsibility, they softened the blame, making the act feel more like a collective necessity of war. And speaking of necessity, our next myth takes us deeper into the horse's shadow, where whispers of curses and ghostly echoes suggest the Trojans weren't the only ones punished by its deception. But here's where the myth takes an even stranger turn. What if the Trojan horse wasn't just a silent trap, but something that spoke? Across ancient texts and later retellings, there are eerie accounts of the horse having a voice of its own. Some legends claim it whispered prophecies, while others say it cursed the Trojans with doom. How could a wooden statue suddenly come to life? One theory points to hidden priests or oracles concealed inside the horse, using ventriloquism to throw their voices and make it seem like the statue itself was speaking. Imagine the terror of the Trojans hearing ominous warnings echo from the horse's hollow belly, words like "Troy will fall tonight" or "Beware the gift that walks." These tricks wouldn't just be psychological warfare. They'd play on the Trojans' deepest fears about divine signs and omens. Then there's the darker version where the horse's voice isn't human at all. A handful of fragmented myths describe it neighing like a real horse, not just as a signal to the Greeks, but as a supernatural omen. In one chilling tale, the horse's wooden jaws creak open to recite a curse in the voice of a long-dead Trojan hero, sealing the city's fate. Was this the work of vengeful gods or just another layer of Greek deception? What's striking is how these stories blur the line between myth and ancient technology. The Greeks were known for engineering marvels like automatons and mechanical theater tricks. Could the talking horse have been an early example of puppetry or hidden mechanisms? Or were these tales invented later to explain the unexplainable, how an entire city ignored every warning until it was too late? Either way, the horse's supposed voice adds a haunting layer to its legend. It wasn't just a weapon of war, it became a phantom, a thing that seemed to breathe, speak, and seal Troy's doom with words as much as swords. And speaking of doom, our next myth plunges into the aftermath, where the horse's ghost is said to have lingered long after the ashes cooled. But let's shift gears for a moment and look beyond Troy, because the idea of hiding soldiers inside a seemingly harmless gift wasn't unique to the Greeks. Centuries later, the Persian Empire pulled off a strikingly similar trick, but with a twist. Instead of a wooden horse, they used camels. According to the historian Herodotus, during the siege of Babylon in the 6th century BCE, the Persian king Cyrus the Great faced a city with impossibly high walls. So he hatched a plan. His army pretended to retreat, leaving behind a small force hidden inside baskets strapped to camels. When the Babylonians, celebrating their supposed victory, brought the camels inside the gates, the Persians sprang their trap, just like the Greeks at Troy. Now here's the big question. Was Homer's Trojan horse just a recycled trope, a common ancient warfare strategy dressed up in epic poetry? Or did these stories emerge independently, revealing a universal truth about deception in war? On one hand, the similarities are hard to ignore. Both tales hinge on exploiting trust, the Trojans assuming the horse was a tribute, the Babylonians viewing the camels as spoils of war. Both rely on the enemy's overconfidence after a feigned retreat, and in both cases the infiltrators strike during a moment of celebration when guards are least vigilant. But there are key differences too. The Persian account is grounded in historical record, while the Trojan horse exists in the realm of myth. Herodotus presents the camel ruse as a clever military tactic, not a divine or supernatural event. There's no Athena guiding Cyrus, no cursed prophecies, just pure strategy. That contrast makes the Trojan horse feel grander, more symbolic, as if the Greeks elevated a simple trick into something legendary. So was Homer borrowing from older tales? It's possible. Ancient storytellers often repurposed themes, and the idea of hidden enemies is a timeless one. But the Trojan horse's enduring power might come from how it transcends mere tactics. It's not just about soldiers in a statue, it's about hubris, fate, and the gods' cruel sense of humor. The Persians' camels won a battle, the Greeks' horse won a story for the ages. And speaking of stories, our next myth takes us back to Troy's final hours, where some say the horse didn't just arrive silently, but sailed in on hidden wheels, as if the gods themselves were steering it toward destruction. Now let's turn our attention to the horse's journey to Troy, because how this massive wooden structure actually reached the city gates is shrouded in its own layer of myth. Some ancient accounts suggest the horse didn't just sit idly on the beach waiting for the Trojans to drag it in. Instead, they claim it was pulled by divine forces like serpents sent by the gods to ensure its delivery. Imagine the scene, a towering wooden beast, its hollow belly filled with warriors, slithering toward Troy on coils of supernatural power. It's a chilling image, one that paints the horse not just as a tool of war, but as an instrument of fate itself. Then there's the even wilder theory that the horse didn't need dragging at all because it sailed. That's right, some myths describe it gliding on hidden wheels or even floating on a makeshift raft, as if the Greeks had engineered a secret mechanism to move it effortlessly. This version turns the horse into something almost mechanical, a marvel of ancient ingenuity. Could it be that later storytellers, impressed by siege engines of their own time, retrofitted the myth to include such details? Or was this simply a way to heighten the drama, making the horse's arrival feel even more ominous and inevitable? What's fascinating here is how these myths reflect the anxieties of the people who told them. A horse dragged by serpents suggests divine inevitability. Troy was doomed because the gods willed it. A horse on wheels, though, hints at human cunning, a reminder that the Greeks' victory wasn't just about luck or destiny, but about outsmarting their enemies. Both versions serve the same purpose, to make the Trojan horse feel unstoppable, whether by miracle or by design. And that brings us to the heart of the next mystery, because once the horse was inside Troy's walls, the real question wasn't how it got there, but what happened when the night grew quiet and the Trojan celebrations turned to silence. But here's something you might not expect. What if the Trojans had their own version of events? While Greek myths dominate the story, Trojan counter-myths offer a fascinating twist. Some accounts claim the horse wasn't a weapon at all, but a sincere peace offering, a sacred gift meant to honor the gods after years of war. Imagine the Trojans waking up to this colossal wooden figure on their shores, interpreting it not as a threat, but as a symbol of reconciliation. Could it be that their trust was exploited, their hope for peace turned against them? Then there's the even more startling alternative, that the Greeks never hid inside the horse at all. Instead, some Trojan traditions insist the invaders slipped into the city through hidden tunnels or gaps in the walls, using the horse as nothing more than a distraction. Picture this: while the Trojans debated the horse's meaning, Greek soldiers were already creeping through the shadows, scaling the very defenses meant to keep them out. This version strips the horse of its legendary cunning, reducing it to a mere decoy in a far simpler and perhaps more brutal scheme. What makes these counter-myths so compelling is how they reframe the story. If the horse was a genuine offering, then the Greeks' victory wasn't just clever, it was a betrayal of faith. And if the horse was just a prop, then the real trick was something far less poetic. Either way, these tales remind us that history is written by the victors, but the defeated have their own truths. And that leads us to the next layer of the mystery, because whether the horse was a divine omen, a mechanical marvel, or a hollow symbol, its legacy hinges on one haunting question: how much of what we know is just the story the Greeks wanted us to believe? Now let's peel back another layer of the Trojan horse's legend, its supposed magic. Some myths claim this wasn't just a cleverly built trap, but an object touched by the supernatural. Imagine the horse not just as wood and nails, but as something enchanted, designed to silence the Greeks hiding inside. Whispers suggest it muffled their footsteps, their breathing, even the clink of armor, making the hollow belly eerily silent as the Trojans inspected it. Could a simple wooden structure pull off such a feat, or does this hint at divine intervention, or perhaps ancient engineering tricks lost to time? Then there's the even more tantalizing idea that the horse glowed. Some accounts describe it as radiant, bathed in an otherworldly light that made it seem like a gift from the gods themselves. Picture the Trojans gazing up at this shimmering figure, convinced it was a sign of favor, not a death sentence. This wasn't just deception, it was psychological warfare playing on their deepest beliefs. If the horse appeared divine, who would dare reject it? But here's the twist: magic in ancient myths often masks real-world ingenuity. Could the enchantment have been something simpler? A coat of polished resin to catch the sunlight, or hidden vents to dampen sound? The line between miracle and mechanics blurs, leaving us to wonder, was the horse's true magic the power of storytelling, turning cunning into myth and myth into something eternal? And that brings us to the next mystery, because whether by spell or sleight of hand, the horse's allure lies in how it straddles the line between the possible and the impossible. Now let's step into the suffocating darkness of the horse's belly, where the Greeks waited silent, tense, and utterly at the mercy of their own ruse. Imagine the stifling heat, the smell of sweat and wood resin, the weight of armor pressing against your ribs as you strain to hear every sound outside. The Trojans, drunk on victory and wine, are celebrating just beyond those wooden walls. Their laughter, their songs, even the clatter of cups, it all echoes through the hollow chamber, a cruel reminder of how close disaster looms if even one soldier coughs or shifts too loudly. This wasn't just a waiting game, it was a test of nerves. Some myths claim the Greeks had a system hand signals, whispered codes, even holding their breath in unison to avoid detection. Others say they rubbed oil on their armor to prevent telltale clinks, or stuffed cloth under their sandals to muffle footsteps. Every detail mattered. One slip and the entire plan crumbles. Then comes the most dramatic moment, the signal. Some versions say a single torch flashed from the horse's eyes or mouth, a prearranged sign to the Greek fleet waiting offshore. Others describe a soldier, maybe Odysseus himself, easing open a hidden panel to wave a flame like a firefly in the night. Either way, that flicker of light was the trigger. The Trojans, lost in revelry, never noticed, but across the plains, Greek eyes were watching, and the trap was about to snap shut. What's chilling is how ordinary this night might have been for Troy. Just another celebration, another toast to their supposed victory. But inside the horse, the Greeks weren't just hiding, they were counting down to vengeance. And when the torches flared, the legend we know was already writing itself in real time. But here's a twist that changes everything. What if the Trojan horse wasn't just a trick? Some ancient myths suggest it was actually meant as a sacred offering to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. Imagine that. The Greeks, known for their cunning, might have framed the entire scheme as an act of piety, a way to honor the very deity who'd helped them fight for 10 long years. This version of the story paints the horse in a whole new light. Instead of a hollow trap, it becomes a votive gift, a towering symbol of gratitude meant to appease Athena. The Trojans, devout in their own worship, might have seen it as a peace offering, a sign that the Greeks had finally accepted defeat and were leaving behind a tribute to the gods. It's a brilliant psychological play. By disguising their deception as devotion, the Greeks exploited Troy's religious reverence, making the horse impossible to refuse. But why Athena? She was the Greeks' patron in the war, the one who'd inspired Odysseus's cleverness. Some myths even claim her likeness was carved into the horse's bridle or eyes, a silent wink to her role in the plot. If the Trojans believed the horse was destined for her temple, destroying it would have been unthinkable, a sacrilege that could bring divine wrath. So they did the one thing the Greeks hoped for. They welcomed it inside their walls, sealing their fate without ever realizing the offering was a weapon in disguise. This twist forces us to rethink the horse's legacy. Was it a masterpiece of military deception or a blasphemous act dressed up as faith? Either way, it reveals how deeply myth and manipulation were intertwined in the ancient world, where even the gods could be part of the con. Now let's step into the eerie aftermath of Troy's fall, where the legend of the horse took on a spectral life of its own. Long after the city's ashes cooled, whispers spread that the wooden beast wasn't just a tool of war, it had become something far more unsettling. Survivors of the sack claimed its ghost lingered, a restless phantom haunting the ruins or even stalking the nightmares of those who'd escaped. Imagine the terror, a hollow-eyed apparition, creaking with the same unnatural stillness as the real horse, appearing to warn other cities of impending doom. Some myths say the horse's spirit materialized before the gates of neighboring kingdoms, its wooden flanks oozing blood or its empty belly echoing with the muffled cries of long-dead Greeks. These visions weren't just ghost stories, they served as divine omens. One chilling tale describes the rulers of Thebes waking in a sweat after dreaming of the horse standing over their beds, its splintered jaws whispering Troy's fate as a cautionary tale. Within weeks, they'd surrendered to Greek forces without a fight, as if the myth itself had become a weapon of psychological warfare. But why would a mere object, even one as infamous as the horse, gain a supernatural presence. Ancient belief held that artifacts soaked in suffering could retain a kind of dark energy. The horse, drenched in betrayal and slaughter, may have been seen as a cursed relic, its spirit bound to replay Troy's destruction as a warning. Even stranger, some accounts suggest the phantom wasn't vengeful but mournful, as if the horse regretted its role in the massacre. A few fragments describe it weeping golden tears or shielding orphaned children in the ruins, a far cry from the ruthless tool of deception we know. This haunting twist forces us to ask, did the horse's ghost reflect the guilt of the Greeks, the trauma of the Trojans, or something deeper? In the end, these myths reveal how the past never truly dies. It lingers, reshapes itself, and whispers across centuries. And perhaps that's the most unsettling legacy of all. Now let's shift our gaze from the ghostly echoes of Troy to the grand spectacle of Rome, where the Trojan horse wasn't just a myth, it became a symbol of imperial might. The Romans, ever the masters of propaganda, saw the horse as more than a clever trick. To them, it was a blueprint for showcasing power, and their emperors weren't shy about borrowing its legend for their own glory. Take the infamous Caligula, for example. History whispers that he commissioned a lavish replica of the horse to parade through Rome, not as a tribute to Greek cunning, but as a flex of his own dominance. Picture it, gilded wood towering over the crowds, a not-so-subtle reminder that Rome, like the Greeks before them, could bend destiny to their will. Some accounts even claim he stuffed the replica with soldiers, recreating the original deception, though whether this was for spectacle or sheer paranoia remains a mystery. But Caligula wasn't alone in this obsession. Other emperors wove the horse into their triumphs, using it as a metaphor for their unstoppable conquests. Victory parades often featured floats mimicking the horse, symbolizing how Rome's enemies, like Troy, were doomed by their own trust. It was psychological theater, a way to say, resistance is futile. Even the act of dragging these replicas through the streets echoed the horse's ominous arrival at Troy, turning history into a warning for anyone daring to defy Rome. Why this fixation? Because the horse wasn't just a story, it was a lesson in control. By resurrecting it, emperors tied their reigns to the inevitability of Greek victory, framing their rule as destiny itself. And in doing so, they proved that myths aren't just tales of the past, they're tools reshaped by those who know how to wield them. So the next time you hear of Rome's grandeur, remember, behind the marble and the marching legions, the shadow of the Trojan horse still loomed large. And its message was clear: power isn't just about strength, it's about spectacle. Now let's turn from Rome's imperial theatrics to the stage itself, where Shakespeare gave the Trojan horse a role far darker than any emperor's propaganda. In Troilus and Cressida, the horse isn't just a weapon, it's a mirror held up to the absurdity of war. Shakespeare, ever the skeptic, strips away the heroics and leaves us with something far more unsettling, a symbol of wasted lives and hollow victories. Picture this: the Greeks and Trojans in the play aren't noble warriors but petty, squabbling figures. Their war less about honor than bruised egos, and the horse. It barely appears on stage, yet its shadow looms over every scene. Some scholars argue Shakespeare uses it as a silent indictment of political theater, a prop in a conflict where no one truly wins. The Greeks' brilliant trick becomes just another move in a game of pride, while the Trojans' trust in the gift feels less like tragedy and more like willful blindness. But here's the twist: Shakespeare's horse isn't just about ancient Troy. It's a jab at his own era's wars, where rulers sent men to die for glory that never came. The play drips with cynicism, asking, was the horse a masterpiece of strategy or just the ultimate con? When characters debate honor and fate, their words ring hollow, as if even they know the war and the horse are just empty spectacles. And that's the genius of it. By downplaying the horse's physical presence, Shakespeare makes it a metaphor for the lies we tell to justify violence. The real deception isn't the wooden beast, it's the idea that war ever has a winner. So next time you hear the Trojan horse praised as a tactical marvel, remember Shakespeare's version, a stark reminder that some legends aren't about heroes. They're about the cost of believing them. With that in mind, let's journey next to the medieval world, where the horse took on a startling new identity, not as a weapon but as a demonic omen. Now, as we step into the shadowy corridors of medieval thought, the Trojan horse undergoes a transformation far stranger than any we've seen yet. In the hands of Byzantine Christian scribes, the legendary trick of the Greeks was no longer just a clever ruse. It became something far more sinister, a tool of the devil himself. Imagine a world where ancient myths collided with Christian doctrine. To medieval scholars, the horse wasn't merely a wooden deception. It was a symbol of pagan deceit, a vessel of evil that needed to be rewritten to fit their spiritual framework. Some manuscripts went so far as to claim the horse was literally demonic, its hollow belly whispering curses or even housing a minor demon sent to mislead the Trojans. Others framed it as Satan's own trick, a precursor to the temptations and false promises warned of in Scripture. This wasn't just creative storytelling, it was a deliberate effort to reframe history. By blending pagan and Christian lore, these scribes turned the horse into a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting false idols. In their versions, the Trojans weren't just fooled by the Greeks, they were ensnared by a spiritual test, one they failed by placing faith in a hollow symbol rather than divine truth. But here's what's fascinating: even as they demonized the horse, these retellings couldn't erase its power. Instead, they gave it new life, transforming it from a war tactic into a moral lesson. The horse became a warning against pride, gullibility, and the seductive lure of earthly gifts, themes that resonated deeply in a medieval world obsessed with sin and salvation. And so, the legend endured not as a relic of the past, but as a living story reshaped for a new age. The horse that once toppled a city now served a higher purpose, teaching believers to beware the devil's snares. But as we'll soon see, even this dark reinterpretation wasn't the end of the horse's journey. Now, shifting our focus to the modern era, we encounter a curious twist in the horse's legacy, one that blends science, myth, and a dash of wild speculation. In recent years, pseudoscientific claims have surfaced, suggesting that the Trojan horse's wooden remains could be traced back to a specific forest or even identified through ancient timber analysis. Some theories go as far as pinpointing exact tree species or locations, claiming to have uncovered the DNA of the legendary artifact. But let's peel back the layers of these claims. First, there's no archaeological evidence, none whatsoever, that the horse ever existed as a physical object. The story comes to us through epic poetry and oral tradition, not from unearthed relics. Even if we entertain the idea that the horse was real, wood doesn't preserve well over 3,000 years, especially in the Mediterranean climate where Troy once stood. The notion that we could extract usable genetic material or trace its origin to a single forest is, frankly, a fantasy. What's more revealing is why these myths persist. The allure of proving the horse's existence speaks to our desire to bridge myth and reality, to touch the tangible remains of legend. But archaeology doesn't work that way. Scholars like Manfred Kaufmann, who excavated Troy for decades, found no trace of the horse, just layers of a city repeatedly destroyed and rebuilt. The closest we've come are artistic depictions like the famous Mycenaean vase showing a wheeled horse, but even these are symbolic, not forensic. So why do these theories gain traction? Part of it is the romantic appeal of solving an ancient mystery with modern tools. Another part is the way pseudoscience often dresses itself in the language of real science. Terms like DNA analysis or dendrochronology sound impressive even when misapplied. But the truth is, the horse's power lies in its symbolism, not its sawdust. It's a story about cunning, not carpentry. As we move forward, remember this: the horse's true DNA isn't in its wood, it's in the countless retellings that keep it alive. And next, we'll see how even Troy's allies reacted to the legend, weaving it into their own stories of fear and surrender. Now, let's turn our attention beyond the walls of Troy to the wider world, because the shockwaves of the Trojan horse didn't stop at the city gates. Neighboring kingdoms, hearing whispers of Troy's downfall, began spinning their own myths about the horse, often as cautionary tales or excuses for surrender. Imagine being a ruler in a nearby city learning that Troy, a powerhouse, had been toppled by a single gift. Fear travels fast, and in some versions of the myth, entire nations reportedly folded without a fight, terrified of suffering the same fate. One particularly dramatic legend claims that the kingdom of Dardania, ruled by Aeneas' cousin, surrendered its armies the moment messengers arrived with news of the horse. They believed the Greeks had divine favor, or worse, that the horse itself was cursed. Another story from Thrace tells of a king who ordered his gates welded shut, convinced the Greeks would send a Trojan bull next. These reactions weren't just panic, they were strategic. Some historians argue that surrendering early allowed these kingdoms to negotiate better terms, using the horse as a convenient scapegoat for their submission. But here's the twist: not all allies caved. The Mysians, for example, allegedly mocked the horse as a Greek trick too obvious to work, until their own scouts reported Troy in flames. Their arrogance became a local proverb: trust a Mysian to laugh at the horse, then weep at the ashes. These myths reveal less about the horse's physical threat and more about the power of psychological warfare. The Greeks didn't just win battles, they weaponized rumor, turning their enemies' imaginations against them. And that's the real lesson here. Whether these stories are true or not, they show how the horse became more than a war machine. It was a symbol of unstoppable deception, one that could make entire nations question their own defenses. Up next, we'll dive into an even eerier aspect of the legend: the haunting echoes some claim to have heard from inside the horse's hollow belly. Was it just the wind or something more supernatural? Stay tuned. Now, let's listen closely to one of the most spine-chilling myths surrounding the Trojan horse, the eerie echoes that reportedly emanated from its hollow belly. Picture this: as the Trojans celebrated what they believed was their victory, some legends claim the wooden giant began to whisper. Not just ordinary sounds, but ghostly murmurs that seemed to slither through the night air, sending chills down the spines of anyone who dared to listen. These weren't just random creaks of wood. According to scattered accounts, the Greeks inside the horse deliberately whispered to one another, their voices bouncing and amplifying in the cavernous interior. To the Trojans outside, it sounded like the horse itself was speaking, or worse, that spirits were trapped within. Some versions of the myth describe guards fleeing their posts, convinced the gods were warning them. Others tell of priests interpreting the echoes as omens of doom, though their warnings, like Cassandra's, went unheeded in the revelry. But here's where it gets even stranger. A few ancient sources suggest the Greeks may have used this very trick to their advantage. By timing their whispers to moments when the wind howled or the crowd's cheers died down, they could make the horse seem alive, feeding the Trojans' superstitions. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare, using fear as a weapon before a single sword was drawn. Whether these echoes were real or just the stuff of legend, they reveal something fascinating about how the ancients understood sound and space. Without modern acoustics, a hollow wooden structure of that size would have been uncanny, warping voices in ways that felt supernatural. And that's the power of this myth. It turns the horse from a simple trap into something almost alive, a creature of dread lurking in plain sight. Up next, we'll step into the modern era where the Trojan horse isn't just a tale of ancient trickery, it's a tourist attraction. How do today's recreations stack up against the myths? The answer might surprise you. Now, let's fast forward to the present day, where the legend of the Trojan horse has taken on a whole new life, not as a weapon of war, but as a must-see tourist stop. Across the world, but especially in Turkey near the ancient site of Troy, towering replicas of the horse stand as photo ops for visitors. At first glance, these reconstructions seem like a fun way to bring history to life. But look closer, and you'll notice how these modern versions often smooth over the darker, messier truths of the myth. Take Turkey's most famous replica, a hulking wooden structure complete with faux weathered planks and a dramatic staircase. It's impressive, sure, but it's also sanitized, more theme park than historical artifact. The real horse, if it existed, was likely a cramped, claustrophobic death trap, not this spacious, Instagram-friendly climb. And while the replicas play up the spectacle of the Greeks hiding inside, they rarely mention the brutal massacre that followed. It's all adventure, no aftermath. Then there's the issue of design. Most recreations borrow from Hollywood's Think Troy 2004 or Assassin's Creed's sleek, angular version rather than ancient accounts. Bronze Age engineers wouldn't recognize these polished, symmetrical beasts. Even the materials are wrong. Modern treated lumber instead of the brittle, fire-prone woods Homer described. The result, a horse that feels more like a movie prop than a piece of history. But perhaps the biggest distortion is the way these attractions frame the story. Placards and tour guides often present the horse as a clever, gotcha moment, downplaying the years of suffering that led to it, or the fact that many scholars debate whether it existed at all. The myth becomes a punchline, stripped of its layers of betrayal, divine meddling, and tragic irony. That said, these replicas aren't useless. For many visitors, they're the gateway to digging deeper into Troy's real archaeology. The key is to see them as starting points, not final answers. After all, the horse's power has always been in the questions it raises about deception, about storytelling, about how we remember the past. And that's something no replica can simplify. Coming up, we'll trace the horse's strange afterlife, how its wood might have been reused, and why some believed it carried a curse. The legend doesn't end when Troy falls. But the story of the Trojan horse didn't end when the Greeks left Troy in ruins. Legends swirl about what happened to its wooden remains, myths that transform the horse from a weapon of war into something far stranger, a cursed relic with a life of its own. One persistent tale claims the Greeks repurposed the horse's wood to build a temple, perhaps as an offering to Athena for her divine favor. But here's the twist: the temple supposedly burned down under mysterious circumstances, sparking rumors that the wood carried Troy's doom with it. Another version says the planks were used to construct a ship, only for it to sink in its maiden voyage, as if the horse's treachery couldn't be escaped, even at sea. These stories tap into an ancient belief that objects soaked in violence retain a kind of dark energy, a trope we still see in modern cursed artifact tales. Then there's the darker myth that the horse's wood was deliberately scattered. Some say the Greeks burned it to ash, fearing its power. Others whisper that Trojan survivors secretly salvaged pieces, hiding them as tokens of vengeance. This idea of the horse's fragments lingering like ghosts ties into broader themes in Greek mythology. Think of the Palladium, Troy's stolen guardian statue, or the blood-stained cloak of Agamemnon. Objects aren't just objects, they carry history, guilt, and sometimes a curse. What's fascinating is how these myths reflect real ancient practices. Reusing sacred wood wasn't uncommon. Temples often incorporated materials from older, hallowed sites. But the horse's legends twist this tradition into something ominous, as if the very act of repurposing its wood risked repeating Troy's tragedy. It's a reminder that for the ancients, the past wasn't just gone. It could reach forward and shape the present. Up next, we'll tackle one of the most intriguing gaps in the story: why Homer himself barely describes the horse's construction. Was it a deliberate mystery or something lost to time? The silence speaks volumes. Now, let's turn to one of the most puzzling gaps in the entire Trojan horse saga: Homer's near silence about its construction. In the Iliad, the horse is barely mentioned, and even the Odyssey only gives us fleeting glimpses. This wasn't an oversight, it was a choice, and scholars have spent centuries debating why. One theory suggests Homer's original verses about the horse's creation were deliberately cut. Ancient bards often tailored their performances to their audience, and some argue that later editors, perhaps favoring Odysseus' cunning over the horse's mechanics, trimmed the details to keep the focus on heroism. After all, the Odyssey is a story of wits, not carpentry. Another idea ties the omission to oral tradition. Before Homer's epics were written down, they were passed mouth to ear for generations. Key details might have faded or shifted with each retelling. Imagine a game of telephone spanning centuries. What started as a vivid description of the horse's hinges could have boiled down to a single line. But the most tantalizing theory, the horse's origins were considered sacred or taboo. Ancient Greeks believed some knowledge was too dangerous to share openly. If the horse's design was linked to divine secrets like Athena's direct involvement, spelling it out might have been seen as tempting fate. This would explain why later poets like Virgil felt free to embellish the tale. By then, the taboo had lifted. Whatever the reason, Homer's silence left room for others to dream. Later writers filled the gap with wild speculations, from hidden trapdoors to enchanted wood. And that's the irony. By saying so little, Homer made the horse even more legendary. Next, we'll explore how the horse's myth intertwines with another cryptic artifact, the Palladium, Troy's stolen guardian statue. Was their fates always linked? The answer might surprise you. Now, let's unravel another layer of Troy's downfall. The mysterious connection between the Trojan horse and the Palladium, the sacred statue believed to protect the city. According to legend, this small wooden figure of Athena was Troy's divine shield, and its theft by the Greeks was just as crucial to their victory as the horse itself. Some myths claim the Palladium's absence left Troy spiritually vulnerable, making the horse's deception possible. Imagine it like this: the statue was the city's lock, and once it was stolen, the gates of fate swung wide open. Ancient sources even suggest Odysseus and Diomedes snuck into Troy before the horse arrived to steal the Palladium, weakening the gods' favor. Without it, the Trojans were blind to the horse's true danger. But here's where the stories clash. Some versions say the Palladium was never truly stolen, that the Greeks took a fake, while the real statue remained hidden. Others argue the horse itself carried a fragment of the Palladium inside, as if the Greeks were returning a piece of Troy's soul only to destroy it. This twisted symbolism paints the horse not just as a weapon, but as a cruel mockery of Troy's faith. The most haunting theory, the Palladium's theft and the horse's arrival were two acts of the same divine play. Athena, the statue's patron, was also said to have blessed the horse. If true, it means the goddess orchestrated Troy's fall from both sides, first by stripping its protection, then by delivering the final blow. Next, we'll step into the shadows of the horse's legacy, how it became a symbol of Troy's shadow self, reflecting the city's doomed pride and the Greeks' hidden guilt. What secrets does this metaphor reveal? Stay with us to find out. Now, let's peer into the darker corners of the Trojan horse myth, where it becomes more than just a weapon, but a mirror reflecting the hidden fears and flaws of both Troy and the Greeks. Think of the horse as Troy's shadow self, a term borrowed from psychology to describe the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. The Trojans, so convinced of their own cleverness in dragging the horse inside, never considered it might be their own arrogance staring back at them. The horse, hollow and deceptive, became the perfect symbol of their blind trust in appearances, a flaw that would cost them everything. But the shadow doesn't just belong to Troy. For the Greeks, the horse might represent their own buried guilt over the brutality of their victory. After all, this wasn't just a battle. It was a massacre, with innocent women and children slaughtered in the chaos. Some myths even suggest the Greeks struggled with nightmares afterward, haunted by the screams from that night. Could the horse, sitting silent in Troy's ruins, have become a physical reminder of the blood on their hands? The symbolism goes deeper when you consider how the horse was built. Constructed from wood taken from sacred groves, it carried the essence of nature twisted into a tool of war. This wasn't just a trick, it was a perversion of something pure, much like the Greeks' own ideals of honor, which collapsed into cruelty by the war's end. Even Odysseus, the mastermind behind the horse, would spend years wandering, punished by the gods for his deceit. And then there's the eerie silence. The horse didn't just hide soldiers, it muffled their movements, turning the Greeks into ghosts in the night. That silence mirrors the way trauma lingers, unspoken but ever present. The Trojans couldn't hear the danger inside, just as the Greeks couldn't fully voice their remorse. Both sides, in their own ways, were trapped by what the horse represented. So what does this shadow reveal? Perhaps that the real tragedy of the Trojan horse isn't just the fall of a city, but the way it exposed the darkest corners of human nature, pride, guilt, and the lies we tell ourselves to survive. Next, we'll confront the myths that soften this story, comparing sanitized children's tales to the brutal reality of what really happened inside Troy's walls. The contrast might surprise you. Now, let's pull back the curtain on how the Trojan horse story has been softened over time, especially in versions meant for younger audiences. Picture the way many children's books or cartoons depict it. A simple tale of clever Greeks hiding inside a wooden horse, popping out to surprise the Trojans, and everyone living happily ever after. It's almost playful, like a game of hide and seek with a historical twist. But the ancient sources tell a far darker story, one that's been scrubbed clean in these retellings. Take Homer's Iliad and Virgil's Aeneid, for example. These texts don't shy away from the horror of that night. The Greeks didn't just emerge, they unleashed a slaughter. Homes were burned, streets ran with blood, and even temples weren't spared. The most chilling accounts describe soldiers killing indiscriminately, including women and children, in a frenzy that lasted until dawn. Compare that to the sanitized version where the worst consequence is a few startled Trojans, and the gap between myth and reality becomes stark. Then there's the fate of the Trojan royal family. In children's tales, King Priam might be portrayed as nobly defeated, but ancient poets like Euripides detail how he was butchered at his own altar, his body left dishonored. Cassandra, the prophetess who warned against the horse, wasn't just ignored, she was dragged away as a prisoner, her curses drowned out by the chaos. These aren't details you'll find in a bedtime story, yet they're central to understanding the true cost of the horse's deception. Why does this matter? Because smoothing over the brutality erases the moral complexity of the myth. The sanitized versions turn the Greeks into unambiguous heroes and the Trojans into naive fools, when in truth, both sides were flawed and the victory came at a horrific price. The real story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Was the horse a stroke of genius or a war crime? Can cunning ever justify cruelty? Next, we'll step into the final moments of the horse's legacy, exploring how its allies, the Greek ships waiting in the shadows, sealed Troy's fate in a coordinated strike. The precision of that night's violence reveals just how far the Greeks were willing to go. Now, let's turn our attention to the silent partners in the Trojan horse's deadly scheme, the Greek ships lurking just beyond the horizon. While the horse steals the spotlight in most retellings, its success hinged on a perfectly timed collaboration with the returning Greek fleet. Imagine the scene. Under cover of darkness, those ships, once thought to have sailed away in defeat, crept back to Troy's shores, their oars muffled, their sails darkened. This wasn't just a backup plan, it was the final piece of a meticulously orchestrated trap. Ancient sources like the Aeneid describe how the Greeks inside the horse waited for a signal, often said to be a torch flashed from Mount Ida, before emerging to unlock the city gates. But here's the twist: many myths suggest the ships weren't just idly waiting. Some accounts claim they'd already disembarked warriors who hid in caves or trenches near the walls, ready to swarm the moment the horse's occupants sprang into action. Others even whisper of secret tunnels dug earlier by Greek spies, connecting the beach to the city, allowing fighters to flood in unseen. What makes this coordination so chilling is the precision. The horse wasn't a standalone trick, it was the centerpiece of a multi-layered assault. While the Trojans celebrated, thinking the war was over, the Greeks were executing a military operation with near-perfect synchronization. Ships, soldiers, and subterfuge all converged in a single, devastating strike. Some historians argue this level of coordination hints at a deeper truth, that the horse myth may have roots in real Bronze Age siege tactics, where deception and timing were as vital as brute force. Yet the myths don't always agree on the details. Earlier versions, like those hinted at in fragments of lost epics, suggest the ship's return was more improvisational, a last-minute gamble rather than a rehearsed maneuver. Later Roman dramatizations, though, turned it into a spectacle, with rowers timing their strokes to the rhythm of Trojan revelry, masking their approach. This evolution reflects how the story grew grander with each retelling, blurring the line between history and legend. One thing's certain, without those ships, the horse might have been just a curious artifact. Their role transforms the myth from a simple ambush into a lesson in the ruthlessness of total war. Next, we'll unravel another eerie layer, the superstitions that arose from the horse's name, and why some believed even uttering it could bring misfortune. Now, let's step into the shadow of an unsettling belief, the idea that merely speaking the name, Trojan horse, could summon disaster. This wasn't just superstition. It tapped into deep-rooted ancient taboos about naming deceptive acts aloud, as if words had the power to awaken their dark magic. Picture this: long after Troy's fall, whispers spread that those who uttered the phrase risked inviting the same betrayal upon themselves. Some myths even tell of sailors refusing to mention the horse before voyages, fearing storms or mutinies, while merchants avoided the term in negotiations, wary of hidden traps in their deals. This fear wasn't entirely irrational. In the ancient world, names held power. To speak something was to invoke its essence. The Greeks knew this well, weaving curses into oaths and sealing fates with spoken prophecies. The horse, as the ultimate symbol of treachery, became a kind of cursed word, its name carrying the weight of Troy's destruction. Homer's audiences might have shuddered at its mention, as if the ghosts of the slaughtered Trojans lingered in the syllables. But the taboo also reveals a fascinating cultural flip. While the Greeks celebrated the horse as a stroke of genius, their enemies, and later, even some Greek communities treated it as a cautionary talisman. Roman historians like Livy noted how rival cities banned the term during diplomatic talks, fearing it might inspire deceit. Even in Sparta, a city built on military cunning, some leaders avoided praising the horse openly, lest it encourage dishonor among their own ranks. The curse's persistence hints at something deeper: guilt. Over time, as the horrors of Troy's sack were retold, the horse became less a trophy and more a reminder of war's moral ambiguities. Was it clever strategy or a breach of divine law? The name itself became a battleground, with each generation projecting their own fears onto it. And here's the twist: this taboo wasn't unique. Across the Mediterranean, similar warnings clung to other infamous tricks, like the story of the Palladium's theft or Odysseus's "nobody ruse." To name them was to risk repeating history, a belief that blurred the line between myth and lived experience. Next, we'll see how this legendary deception took on new life in the digital age, inspiring everything from military ops to video game quests. Proof that the horse's name, cursed or not, still holds power over our imagination. But let's fast forward from ancient whispers to modern screens, where the Trojan horse gallops into an entirely new arena: video games. Here, the legend isn't just retold, it's reshaped, letting players step into the sandals of Greeks, Trojans, or even the horse itself. Take Age of Mythology, where the horse isn't just a story beat, it's a literal superweapon. Players can build it as a myth unit, rolling it toward enemy gates to unleash a squad of hoplites, blending history with gameplay in a way Homer never imagined. Then there's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where the horse becomes a puzzle. Climbing inside its hollow belly, players uncover clues about the war's true orchestrators, weaving the myth into the game's conspiracy-laden narrative. It's a clever nod to ancient espionage, but with a twist. This time, you're the one unraveling the deception. Smaller indie games take even bolder swings. Hades, for instance, turns the horse into a running joke among Olympian gods, with Zeus quipping about overrated wooden contraptions. It's a playful jab at the myth's solemnity, showing how games can both honor and humor the past. But the real innovation, games that flip the script entirely. In Total War Saga, Troy, players can reject the horse, choosing diplomacy or siege engines instead. Suddenly, the myth isn't fate, it's a choice, challenging the idea that Troy's fall was inevitable. Other titles like Troy, a Total War Saga, even let you play as the Trojans, rewriting history by spotting the ruse and burning the horse before it's too late. What's fascinating is how these adaptations reflect our modern obsessions. Where ancient poets saw divine will, game designers see systems, physics engines calculating the horse's weight, AI governing Trojan guard suspicion, or morality meters judging whether deception is heroic. The horse becomes a lab for testing player agency, asking, would you have fallen for it? And let's not forget the Easter eggs. From God of War's murals hinting at Kratos's unseen role in Troy to civilization's great engineer, Epeius crafting the horse as a wonder, these nods tuck the myth into gaming's DNA. Even Minecraft players have rebuilt the horse block by block, proving its legacy is as adaptable as pixelated sand. So why does this ancient trick still captivate gamers? Maybe because at its core, the horse was history's first boss fight, a puzzle waiting to be solved, a risk begging to be taken, and in a medium built on interaction, that's the ultimate power-up. Next, we'll crack open the wildest theory of all, that the horse wasn't even a horse, but a comet, a plague, or something far darker. Now, let's peel back the layers of one of the most bizarre twists in the Trojan Horse saga, the idea that it wasn't a horse at all. Some fringe theories suggest the legend is actually a coded metaphor for something far stranger. Imagine this: what if the wooden horse was really a poetic way to describe a devastating plague? Ancient texts sometimes used animals as symbols for diseases, and Troy's sudden downfall could align with the rapid spread of illness. The Greeks gifting the horse might symbolize the silent, invisible threat of infection creeping past the city's defenses. Then there's the celestial angle. A handful of scholars argue the horse was inspired by a comet, a fiery omen streaking across the sky before Troy's destruction. Ancient cultures often linked comets to disaster, and the horse's arrival could mirror a comet's appearance, with its belly full of warriors representing the chaos trailing behind it. Homer's vivid imagery might have been his way of turning an astronomical event into epic poetry, but the wildest theory, that the horse was a stand-in for an ancient superweapon, something as destructive as an atomic bomb. Proponents point to cryptic descriptions of the horse, blinding Trojans with light or causing earthquakes, echoing the apocalyptic force of advanced tech. While there's zero evidence the Greeks had such power, the idea taps into a deeper truth. The horse, as a symbol, was always about unleashing unimaginable devastation. Of course, these theories are speculative, but they reveal how the myth bends to fit our fears. Whether it's disease, celestial doom, or lost technology, the horse becomes a mirror for whatever terrifies us most. And that's the real final secret. Its power lies not in wood or hinges, but in the human mind's endless ability to reinvent it. Next, we'll wrap up our journey by asking the ultimate question: would you have taken the horse inside Troy's walls? And so we arrive at the final piece of this epic puzzle. The Trojan horse isn't just a relic of ancient warfare, it's a timeless lesson in human nature. Think about it, across 3,000 years, this story still chills us because it speaks to the heart of trust and betrayal. The Greeks didn't just outsmart Troy, they exposed how easily certainty can crumble. Whether you see the horse as divine trickery, military genius, or a metaphor for life's unpredictable traps, its legacy is undeniable. It's a masterclass in deception, yes, but also in the fragility of even the mightiest defenses. Now, here's the question that's haunted historians and storytellers alike. If you'd stood on Troy's walls that day, would you have dragged the horse inside? It's easy to judge the Trojans now, but imagine the pressure. The exhaustion of a 10-year war, the lure of a seeming victory, the fear of offending the gods. Hindsight is always perfect, but in the moment, the horse played on every human weakness: curiosity, pride, hope. That's why this myth endures. It's not about wood or warriors, it's about us. Every generation finds new meaning in it, whether as a warning about blind trust, a symbol of creative strategy, or even a mirror for modern anxieties. The horse reminds us that the greatest threats often come disguised as gifts. If you've enjoyed unraveling these 50 myths with me, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. There are countless more legends waiting to be explored, each with its own secrets, twists, and timeless lessons. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you're told. After all, that's how you avoid your own Trojan horse moment.